we are with our second series of videos in regards to the visual arts as it applies to third grade through the California State Standards. We are here with Bonnie Martland this morning, and she is going to be focusing today on the principles of design. So Bonnie, we're very happy to have you here this morning.
Okay, the elements of art tell what artists use to make art. The principles of design tell us how to use those principles. Now we have line, color, shape, and so on. How do we know how to use them? If you're sitting with a blank piece of paper and you're trying to start, where do you go? You've got a million colors, you've got all kinds of lines. How are you going to organize your page? So the principles of design will give you the guidelines on how to do that. And like there's seven elements of art, there's 7 principles of design. There's balance, movement, emphasis, contrast, unity, pattern, and rhythm. Okay, in artwork, there's 2 kinds of balance. There's asymmetrical balance and there's symmetrical balance. In artwork, you will most likely find symmetrical balance. There's very few, at least in Western art tradition, very few paintings or pieces of artwork that are symmetrical. A symmetrical balance would be if you put a line down the center of the painting and it was a mirror image one side to the other. So if you had a tile wall and you put a mirror, you'd see the same thing on each side because of the tile pattern repeating. But in most drawings and painting that won't be the case. But you still need to have a picture balance visually. So for instance, in this case, we have large pieces, large shapes over here, but it's balanced over here not by exactly the same thing, but one larger shape and a lot of smaller ones. So if you take any painting, say we go over to this one over. Okay, on this one, here's an abstract painting by Romare Bearden. On this side we have these figures, and they're made up of a lot of smaller pieces or smaller chunks or shapes. On this side, it's balanced by larger pieces, larger shapes. And so these fewer larger shapes are balanced by a series of smaller ones. So you don't feel like all the weight's on one side of the picture. It's still visually balanced, but this would be an asymmetrical piece of artwork. The second principle of design is movement. And movement doesn't mean that a painting is moving around or that something's jumping around inside the picture frame. It means that it's the way the artist has your eye move into and through a picture, into the painting. It doesn't just happen that way. The artist plans on where he wants your eye to go and eventually where it should land in a painting. So in this painting, for instance, your eye might move to this big red umbrella and then travel along these other shapes as it moves your eye through the picture. And if you get here, it's probably going to move your eye on back into the background here. So the artist is moving you by pathways and by spots of color, like stepping stones, through the picture. So he's using the various elements of color, shape, lines, diagonal lines, and so on to move you into and through the painting, and that's what movement means in a picture. And I mentioned earlier, just like the principles of elements of art can be used in various kinds of artwork, realistic, abstract, and non-representational, the same follows for principles of design. So here we have a non-representational artwork. It's got shapes and lines and color and so on, but it's not a picture of a specific thing. But still the artist has moved your eye into and through the painting. Again, we have pathways that connect and bring your eye in and through the picture. Here's lines, diagonal lines move you. And so you're moved into and throughout a piece of artwork. Emphasis in a work of art refers to the focal point or the focal area. Where is it that the artist wants your eye to move to, eventually come to and rest in a painting? In this picture of the lady, it's her face. And we have avenues, color, light color moving you in. We have spots of light color that are bringing you up to her face. The lines from the background are bringing you in. And so you have been moved through the picture, but you're going to come to this spot of emphasis. If there's a face, it's quite, and especially if it's one face, it's usually always going to be the focal point. In some paintings, it's not as clear. We'll talk about contrast in a minute, and one of the things they do in this painting to make this a focal point or a point of emphasis is to have a light area around, surrounded by dark. And so your eye is drawn to that spot. And that's the focal point or the point of emphasis in a picture. Okay, the last painting we looked at was realistic, and it was pretty obvious to see where the point of emphasis was, that it was the figure's face. Now we have an abstract painting of a watch. We get all the watch parts and pieces, and it's easy to see that we're drawn into and around into this painting. But where does our eye come to rest? I've asked different students, and they don't always have the same answer. And that's okay if you can justify your answer. For me, it comes over here. We've got more pattern surrounded by an area with less pattern. And the darker lines tend to bring me back into this area, and the detail keeps me here. So even though I move around and about the picture, eventually I end up coming back to this spot. So for me in this painting, that's the point of emphasis. So it doesn't have to be a realistic picture. It can be any kind of artwork. Okay, here we have another painting, and we're going to talk about contrast. When we talked about Our Lady in the other picture, we said the contrast of her light face against a darker background made that stand out as a point of emphasis. Now, contrast, there can be lots of types of contrast in a picture. Dark and light, large and small, pattern and plain, big, small. Lots of things create contrast, and that makes a picture more interesting. In this, we have a large negative space area here that's dark. And then the contrast, we have a lot of smaller pieces here, and it's dark and it's light. And the small pieces of fruit against the larger pieces of fruit. And usually where the greatest contrast is where the focal point is, or the point of emphasis. So in this painting, our eye is being drawn by lines, by shapes, and the use of the light pattern, or the light shapes against the dark. Our eye is being drawn to this part of the picture. So the focal point is this grouping of fruit right here. It's not over here, it's not down here, but this light area here sort of stands out at us. And the lines that the artist has used to draw us there, make sure our eye is going to go there. So this is contrast in a painting. This is another painting that's good to show the principle of contrast. We have large shapes, which I mentioned before, as contrasted to smaller shapes here. We have cool colors contrasted against warm colors. We have dark contrasted against light. We have small rectangular things against bigger rectangular things, where you're using the same shapes basically. A lot of squares and rectangles, and then you have smaller ones, so you're contrasting those. And so again, this is a really good painting showing contrast and how contrast creates interest in a picture. And if I ask you where the focal point is, I've had different students give me different opinions, but most all of them will say that our eye is drawn by these dark shapes hopping, contrasted these dark shapes against the light makes your eye hop back into this area, and you're being taken around, moved around the corner. So somewhere back here is probably your point of emphasis or your focal point. But contrast moves your eye through the painting. Another contrast in this painting is organic shapes versus geometric shapes. So we have these measured kind of rectangular, triangular shapes, and then we have these very organic, free-form from the plant shapes here, these very organic shapes. And so that's a contrast as well as the dark and light and the big and small and the warm and the cool. Another principle of design is unity. Unity means you use the elements in a way to pull the different parts of the picture together, to make the painting or the drawing work as a whole. Now, there's a number of ways you can do this. One is to repeat your elements. So you can repeat shapes, you can repeat colors. So in this particular painting, we have lots of circular shapes, but we've got different sizes of them. So we have contrast here, but because we're reusing these shapes, it unifies the picture. Another thing that unifies the picture is repeating colors. There's not 10,000 colors in this painting. They've used black and white and the values of that, the grays, and they've got different values of yellow, the warm, orangey yellow, the lighter yellow, and so they've got a very limited palette of color. And by repeating those colors and repeating those patterns, it unifies the picture. Now, the key to a successful picture, a painting, a drawing, almost anything that you might make, a collage and so on, is to balance unity and contrast. If you have all your circles the same size, that would be unity, but it wouldn't be very interesting. So you need to have the contrast of the different sizes of your circles or the different tones of your colors. Even if you're repeating the same colors and shape, change them some way to give them some contrast. So have enough contrast to make a picture interesting, enough things that are repeated, that are reused, and that are the same to create unity, and then you'll have a good drawing or a good painting. Another principle of design is pattern. Now, in artwork that's Western, European, American, Canadian, Western artwork, pattern, a whole pattern like a tile backsplash or a mosaic or a wallpaper pattern isn't normally the whole artwork. It's usually patterns used in Western artwork as an accent or part of the composition. So here we have pattern, the flower pattern on the lady's, the dancer's skirt, but it's contrasted against a negative space here that's a big solid color. Here's a pattern. Again, patterns balanced by a flat, solid, dark area. So pattern helps to make a painting interesting, but seldom in Western art, as I say, will the whole area be a solid pattern. In Far Eastern art or Middle Eastern art, you might see that more often. But here, patterns usually used, and in this case, they did a really good job of using pattern to accent and to actually frame out the main figure and the focal point of this painting. So actually the pattern's used almost like a thick line, and a thin liner here, to draw you right into the focal point of this painting. So pattern is something that is a principle of design that can be used to incorporate into your art and make it more interesting. The last principle of design that we're going to talk about is rhythm. And rhythm needs to be used in the third grade curriculum. It's one of their focal areas. And in rhythm, you're repeating pattern, but the pattern has an irregularity in it. In music, it would be an underlying beat that you hear in the music that draws you, it's a constant beat that's underneath the music. In artwork, it's a pattern that's used within the painting or in the drawing, but it's not as regular as pattern. So you might have similar things happening, but there'll be an irregularity in it. So for instance, here we have the lines and the little going this way and the little jagged lines going this way that create the pattern of the trees in this watercolor. So we have them repeated, but the trees are not all the same size. And here we might have a group, and here we might have only 4. Another time we have 1 or 2. So you're repeating this pattern, but the pattern's not as regular as in what we call pattern as an element of art. So rhythm, it's moving you through the painting, but you might go da 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 da. You're moving up, down, high, low. You're moving through the picture. And that's the way rhythm works in a painting. You're taken through, almost like with a beat of a music, you're taken through the design of the artwork. And so that's rhythm in a painting. Rhythm can be made with shapes. You could have rhythm that's a color. You might just look at the yellows. You go, here's one sound, another sound because it's yellow. Blue, yellow, blue, yellow, blue, blue, yellow. So you're seeing that there's a rhythm, there's a change in the pattern, and that's the rhythm in the painting. So color, texture of the brushes, maybe here you've got watercolor, and here the artist might switch to something else that would change the rhythm. You might have soft shapes and soft colors, and then the artist would switch to something stronger color or harder lines that would change the rhythm of the painting. So how the elements are used, the repeating, but a repeating with irregularity causes a rhythm in a painting. If you remember from the beginning, we talked about that third grade students, according to state standards, are expected to have a knowledge of and use the elements of art and principles of design. They need to create the illusion of space, be able to, and compare works made with different media, create works of art based on their observations, create works using different media like drawing, paintings, printmaking, and so on. They need to analyze how diverse works may communicate similar ideas and moods and themes. They need to distinguish among representational, abstract, and non-representational works of art and use the appropriate criteria to do that. So, for instance, how effectively does an artist use line, shape, and color to communicate a mood? They need to apply criteria to their own work, and they need to apply their understanding of the communicative quality of the visual arts to other areas. Now, your students should be able to do that once they learn the elements of art and principles of design, because now they have the tools. Now, not all artwork uses all the elements of art or all the principles of design. Each piece is unique. But the elements and principles used together give us all a common language to talk about art, to help us make artistic decisions about what we should consider when planning a creative work of art, and how to communicate and judge artwork, even though the artwork may be quite different. On this little drawing, I'm working on the principle of movement, and you can see that the pathways into the drawing are moving your eye, hopefully, to our little focal point here, our little bird. So these branches are all pathways moving us into the picture. The lines of the hills and the roadways here, or the ground lines, are drawing us to this point of the picture, and again, this tree line is bringing you up to that focal point. So that creates movement in a painting or a drawing. We're talking about contrast in a piece of art. So contrast usually means something's different. Something's dark among light things, something small among large things. In this case, we have a straight lined shape here among curved circular shapes. And because it's the one thing that's different here, that's where our eye's going to go. So the contrast, again, in this little picture makes this the focal point. Okay, remember in artwork there's two kinds of balance. There's symmetrical balance and there's asymmetrical balance. The most common form in art pieces would be asymmetrical balance. Asymmetrical balance, it's visually balanced. The scale is visually balanced, but here we have one large thing against three small things. So the weight is equal, but the pieces are different. On symmetrical balance, you have exactly the same thing on one side of a picture as the other. It's like a mirror image. So here we have this little guy on this side. We have the same thing on this side. So that's symmetrical balance. This is asymmetrical balance. Pattern in artwork is where something is repeated in a regular manner. So here, black, red, black, red, black, red. It's the same all the way through. The patterns are the same. Red circle on white, red circle on white, red circle on white. It repeats all the way through, and that's pattern. It's used for accents in most Western art, but not as regularly as a whole piece of art as it would be in the Middle East or some other areas of the world. But still, it's an important principle of design to keep in mind when creating artwork. Emphasis in an artwork is where your eye lands. Where's the focal point? Where does the artist want your eye to come to rest? He can move you through by shapes, lines, colors, but eventually he's probably going to want you or she to come to rest in a certain part of the composition. So in this case, it's here. We have dark against light, large area in the back, a small. So the contrasts, all the little contrasts that are happening here and the way the lines have drawn us in, makes our eye go to this part. So this is the point of emphasis in this design. Rhythm in an artwork is, again, repeating elements, but you're repeating them in a way that's not as regular as in patterns. So here we have rhythm by having a lot of these long shapes repeated, but they're not repeated exactly the same way. They're slightly different in shape and height, but also here we have 2, here we have 3, here we have 4. So it changes as we go through, but yet we're repeating similar elements. So that gives a rhythm, a little dot, big ones, different sizes. So as you go through, the emphasis is a little different because of the size of that shape. and where they're placed. So that provides a way to create rhythm within a piece of artwork. You go down, down, dot, down, dot, down, dot, down, 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 dot, dot, down, dot. And you go on through the painting, and it creates a rhythm as you move through the piece. Okay, unity in an artwork, in this case this little design, is created when you repeat elements. So we repeated the shape of the circles, we repeated the color, we repeated the curved lines, and these circular shapes are used from tiny little shapes to large shapes. The value in the color changes from light to medium to darker, but you're still repeating the same color with some changes. You're repeating the same kinds of lines, and you're repeating the same shapes. You might be changing the darkness, the value in the colors, but you're repeating similar elements, and that creates unity in an artwork. The contrast of the different sizes and the different values creates interest. Okay, lines in an artwork can move you through the picture. Diagonal lines can make you move across a page. Curved lines can soften the mood of a picture. Jagged lines jump you and move you around and create a different mood altogether. If we made this line really dark, then it becomes an even different mood than this light picture. There's curved lines, there's dotted lines, there's broken lines, thick lines, thin lines, and the way these are used throughout a painting will help create a mood and move you through the painting. So it's a very critical element of art. Okay, shape is an element of art that has two dimensions. It has height and it has width, but it's flat. It's a shape, and the two main kinds of shapes are organic shapes, which are free form. You often find shapes like that in nature. And then we have geometric shapes, which are measured shapes, and they have measured, crisp, clear edges. So the two kinds of shapes. Form is an element of design that's similar to shape, except shape only has two dimensions, height and width. A form has three dimensions. It has height, width, and depth. So we have a three-dimensional shape. It can either be a real three-dimensional shape like a cube sitting on the table, or it can be implied as this one is, where it's drawn on the page. So here we have a square, a shape, and here we have a form, which is a cube. A triangle is a shape. A pyramid is a form. And just like shapes, forms can be organic or geometric. A rock might be an organic shape that can be in three dimensions of form. So here's an organic shape, here's an organic form. Again, height, width, and depth. Color is an element of art that's used a lot by third grade students. And they should know things like the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue, which are used to make all other colors. If you mix two primary colors, you get a secondary color, which is their secondary colors are orange, green, and purple. They should understand warm colors and cool colors. Warm colors, if they think of things like the sun, the beach, hot things, they'll remember warm colors are red, orange, and yellow. If they think of cool things like of the ocean or grass or the mountains, they'll remember cool colors, which are blue, green, and purple. Complementary colors are colors that are opposite on the color wheel, like red and green, orange and blue. And colors like that create energy. The farther apart on the color wheel, the more movement is indicated in an artwork. Analogous colors are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, and they create more of a soothing composition. So if you use colors that are red, orange, and yellow, it happens to be warm colors, but they're next to each other on the color wheel. Blue, blue-green, green, colors that run right next to each other on the wheel will create a more soothing picture. Okay, value is refers to the lightness or darkness in a painting or in a color. It's not how much a painting is worth. It's the dark to the light and the variations in between that's used in a painting. Okay, texture is an element of art that indicates how something feels or would feel if you could actually do it. There's two kinds of texture, actual texture and implied texture. If you have a drawing such as this, they want to imply what the cushions, the pillows feel like? Is it soft? Does it have fringe? Is it three-dimensional? What does it feel like? Or sometimes in art we have actual texture where there is a piece of cloth or a piece of rope or something like that that you can feel. Otherwise it's an implied texture, shows what it would feel like if you could actually feel it. Okay, in this painting, there's several examples of how the artist has implied texture in the artwork. You can feel the thickness of the little braids here and the tassels. You can feel the three-dimensional round, smooth shapes of the beads and the embroidery on the thin scarf, the satin smooth feel on the dress, the texture of her hair as it comes through. So there's lots of implied texture in this drawing. Looking at the painting of the Dovecote by Francois Boucher, you can see that this painting uses really all the elements and all the principles. In the elements of art, we have lines, we have color, we have shapes, we have space, we have positive space and negative space, we have depth going back and distance in space, we have texture, we can feel the wood and see the leaves and the grass. So we have texture and we have value. We have, even just in the clouds, we have the darks, the mediums, the light value. In the trees, the light, the medium, the darker values to give depth to the painting. When we think about principles of design, we have balance. It's visually balanced. It's asymmetrical. It's visually balanced, but not exactly the same on each side. We have movement in the painting. The artist has pathways moving us into the picture and pulling us to the point of emphasis, which is right here. There's the focal point, and it's a focal point for a number of reasons. The lines that bring us here, the open space around the little figure, so this almost frames these figures here. So we know that that's the focal point. There's contrast, the figures against the open, the dark against light, larger things against smaller things. So there's lots of contrast to make the picture interesting. But there's also things that make the picture unified. We have repeated trees. We have repeated elements. We have repeated shapes, the soft of the clouds, the soft shapes of the trees. And then the one warm color here, a lot of cool colors in this painting, and then the warm right here to help focus us on that point of interest. There's patterns. If you look at the patterns in the leaves, the patterns along the bridge, the patterns within the logs, and also rhythm. Here we've got repeated elements, They're not exactly the same, but they are repeated lines of the tree trunks, the wood of the porch, or the bridge, the wood here. So we have repeated elements that create a pattern to move us in and throughout the painting and bring us to the focal point. So all the things that would make a successful piece of artwork, a drawing, a painting, a print, design, you find within this painting. So in summarizing, not all work uses all the elements of art or incorporates all the principles of design. This piece really almost does, but each piece is unique. So the elements of art and principles of design used together can give us all a common language to use when we talk about art. They provide us with help in making artistic decisions about what we should do when we consider planning or creating a work of art, and they provide a way common to all to look at and make judgments of art, no matter whether it's realistic or abstract or non-representational. It's a common language that provides a basis for all of us to look at the visual arts. I hope this overview of the elements of art and principles of design will inspire you and your students to engage in the visual arts through a new lens, a lens of discovery.
Thank you for watching and recognizing the value of teaching the visual arts in the classroom. These professional development videos are meant to enhance your professional practice. Thank you for inspiring students to think, to learn, to achieve, to care through the arts.